The town of Willow Creek was small enough to forget, but never small enough to forgive. It sat along the edges of Pennsylvania pine country, where the map folds into itself with back roads and forgotten rivers. The creek wasn't really a creek at all. It was a lake, wide and silent, formed when a logging company dammed the valley in the 1930s. The locals called it a creek because it made them feel less like they were living beside a grave. By 1992, everyone in town knew the name Morning Star Camp. It was where the summer kids went to roast marshmallows, swim in the murky water, and learn how to paddle canoes that leaked by the second day. Parents loved it because it was cheap. Kids loved it because it felt endless. And then 4 children never came back. It was June 15th, the first week of camp, when the bus pulled up to Willow Creek. 15 children piled out, counselors herding them like sheep toward the cabins. Among them were Emily Carter, age 10, always clutching a notebook. Tommy Ruiz, age 11, baseball cap never straight. Shannon Porter, age 9, freckles sprayed across her cheeks. Danny O'Neill, age 12, lanky, shy, trailing behind. They were last seen walking toward the Eastern Trail, the one that led to the dock. Witnesses said the fog came fast that day, rolling low across the water until the cabins looked like islands. By dinner, the 4 children had not returned. By nightfall, the camp director was phoning parents. By midnight, police cruisers lined the dirt road. Searchers combed the shoreline with lanterns, dogs, and borrowed boats. But there was nothing. No clothes, no shoes, no splintered dock, no splash. Just silence. The official record said, presumed drowned. But everyone in town knew that meant we stopped looking. 33 years later, Willow Creek had tried to reinvent itself. The new resort project, Willow Pines Lodge and Spa, was supposed to bring tourists, weddings, and Instagram. Billboards promised a lake reborn. But lakes don't forgive. On the second week of excavation, when construction crews began clearing brush for the waterfront villas, a backhoe operator named Derek Moore heard something through his headphones. He thought it was bleed from the radio station. Static, a child's laugh. He pulled the headset off. The sound was still there. From the lake. A high, thin voice calling out across the water. "Danny!" The men laughed at first. Derek didn't. He shut off the engine. The sound continued. Low. Echoing. Like it came from beneath the surface. By nightfall, half the crew refused to work the shore. The project manager filed a noise complaint with county officials. And that's when the story reached Detective Claire Harlow, a former missing persons investigator, turned reluctant small-town cop. Claire was not born in Willow Creek, which already made her suspect. She'd transferred from Pittsburgh 2 years earlier after burning out on the city cases that never ended with happy reunions. Her eyes had the constant tiredness of someone who never bought blackout curtains. When the call came about haunted construction equipment, she almost ignored it. But the name of the lake, pulled her back. She remembered Willow Creek from Academy folklore. The camp kids, the 4 names whispered like a curse at missing persons seminars. No bodies, no closure, just silence. She drove down to the construction site at dusk, when the last orange light faded into mist. Derek met her near the half-built pier, cigarette glowing like a warning. "I'm not crazy," he said before she even asked. "You hear things long enough, you know when they're not just in your head." Claire stared out at the water. The surface was flat, black, swallowing the sky. "What did you hear?" she asked. Derek exhaled smoke, eyes flicking to the shoreline. "Kids, like they're calling roll call." "Names. Which names?" He swallowed. "One of them was Danny." Claire's notebook stilled. 33 years later, The lake still remembered. News spreads in a town like Willow Creek faster than power outages. By the next morning, the diner was buzzing, construction workers hearing voices, ghosts of the camp kids back to haunt the living, the lake taking back what was stolen. Mayor Helen Drake called an emergency town meeting at the high school gym. Parents, retirees, and business owners filled the bleachers. The air smelled of floor polish and panic. Claire stood near the podium, flipping through the old 1992 case files. Black and white photos of the 4 children stared up at her, faces frozen in youth. Mayor Drake tapped the mic. "We're not here to rehash old tragedies," she said. "We're here to address false rumors that threaten new investment." Murmurs of agreement and dissent rippled through the crowd. But then an old man in the back row, Henry O'Neill, Danny's father, rose shakily to his feet. His voice cracked, but it carried. "My boy's not false. He's not a rumor. He's my son. And if his name's still in the water, you don't cover it with a hotel." The gym fell silent. Claire met Henry's eyes, and in that moment, she knew. This case wasn't just about ghosts. It was about wounds left open long enough to rot into legend. That night, Derek Moore returned to the lake with his phone. He stood at the dock, alone, fog creeping in around his boots. He pressed record. Minutes passed. Only crickets, distant engines, the lap of water. And then, faint, almost swallowed by static, came a whisper. "Emily." Derek dropped the phone, heart hammering. The sound repeated, louder this time, rolling across the surface, like it rode the mist. "Emily!" The voice of a child. Clear as breath. Derek uploaded the clip online before he could think. By dawn, it had 1,000 plays. By noon, 10,000. By night, the world was listening to Willow Creek. Detective Claire Harlow sat in her cruiser, engine idling, headlights cutting twin tunnels into the fog. She replayed the recording Derek had captured, holding the phone inches from her ear. The whisper was faint, but undeniable. "Emily." It carried the weight of breath, not static. A voice, young and fragile, drifting up from a place where no lungs should exist. Claire had spent years on missing person cases. She'd heard mothers sob names into the night, fathers call into abandoned fields, siblings whisper to the dark. But this was different. The cadence wasn't grief, it was recognition. She wrote in her notebook, name Emily Carter, source audio clip, verification pending. But in her chest, she already knew. The next morning, Claire went to the Willow Creek Historical Society, a red brick building that smelled of dust and lemon cleaner. The curator, Marla Jenkins, had lived through the 1992 tragedy as a teenager. "You really digging this back up?" Marla asked, sliding a box of files across the counter. "Some wounds don't close because they're not supposed to." Claire ignored the warning. She flipped open the brittle folders, handwritten statements from counselors. Polaroids of the camp dock, fog so thick it looked painted. Personal effects cataloged and returned. Emily's notebook, Tommy's cap, Shannon's hair ribbon, Danny's pocket knife. Claire paused at Emily's notebook. The pages were childish sketches. Trees, cabins, smiley faces. But the last entry, written in shaky letters, made her throat tighten. "If the fog comes, don't go near the water." That's when they talk loudest. Sheriff Mark Leland didn't like her digging. His office walls were lined with deer heads and fishing trophies, not case files. "I closed that case before you moved here," he said, pointing a thick finger. "Accident. 4 drownings. Simple as that." Claire leaned across his desk. 4 kids vanish in daylight, no bodies, no evidence, just fog? That's not simple. That's negligence. Leland's jaw tightened. You start stirring this up, you'll spook investors. This town's hanging by a thread, detective. Don't cut it! But Claire wasn't listening anymore. Through the open window, carried faint on the wind, she swore she heard it again. A whisper. Danny. She turned. The sheriff hadn't moved. The sound had come from the lake. Henry O'Neill's testimony. That night, Claire visited Henry O'Neill, the last living parent of the missing four. His house sagged at the edges, porch swing creaking in the summer night. Henry sat with a framed photo on his lap. Danny in his baseball uniform, cap too big, smile too shy. They told us drowned, Henry rasped. Said the lake don't give back what it takes. But I never believed it. Danny was strong. Stronger than me? Claire asked gently. Did you ever hear voices from the lake? Henry's eyes glistened. Every year on his birthday, I go down there. Sit on the dock. Sometimes, I swear, I hear him. Not crying, not calling for help. Just saying my name. He looked at Claire, voice breaking. Like he's still 12. Like he never grew by midweek. Derek's clip had spread beyond town. Paranormal forums dissected the waveform, arguing whether it was human or machine. A YouTube channel called Phantom Frequencies uploaded slowed versions, claiming hidden phrases. Emily, don't run. Danny, stay. We're still here. The construction site shut down after workers refused to set foot on the shoreline. The mayor called it baseless hysteria. Investors called it bad publicity. But at night, more townsfolk gathered at the dock, phones held out, waiting. Some caught only static. Others caught something else. Children's voices weaving through fog like threads. Claire's revelation. Claire pieced the timeline together on her wall. 1992. 4 children vanish. Fog heavy. 2025. Resort breaks ground. Fog returns. Voices recorded. Names repeated. Her pen circled one phrase. When the fog comes, they talk loudest. She leaned back in her chair. The voices weren't random. They were anchored, bound to the fog, to the water, to the night, which meant they were trying to be heard. Not ghosts, not echoes. Witnesses. On the 7th night, Claire stood at the dock alone, recorder in hand. Mist crawled across the water, swallowing the world. She pressed record. Her breath fogged in the air. At first, silence. Then the lapping of water, the creak of wood, and then, clear as glass. Claire, her own name. Spoken in the voice of a child who had never met her. The recorder clicked off. The lake had stopped whispering about the past. Now it was whispering to her. The lake didn't like to be ignored. By the second week of the resort's closure, Willow Creek had gone from sleepy to sleepless. Tourists canceled reservations, workers filed unemployment, and the mayor's smile cracked under the weight of questions she couldn't answer. But the fog stayed, every night thick as wool, and with it came the whispers. Detective Claire Harlow didn't believe in hauntings, not officially. But she had run the recording more than 50 times, mapped the frequencies, slowed them down, and still, there it was, the voice, saying her name, and now she needed to know why. At the Historical Society, Marla Jenkins reluctantly gave Claire a box labeled Camp Morningstar, Lost and Found. Inside, among cracked flashlights and broken sandals, was Emily Carter's notebook. The last entry, already known, warned about the fog. But beneath that page, pressed so hard the pencil nearly tore the paper, was something new. A list of words, written in a child's hand. Cabin 6, red door. Don't Tell Claire circled it in her notes. Cabin 6 had been sealed after the disappearance, later torn down. but the foundation still stood. Somewhere in the woods, buried under vines. She went at dawn, flashlight in hand, mist clinging to the trees. The woods were quiet in that heavy way that made silence louder. Birds didn't sing. The ground held damp echoes of long-gone steps, and then she found it. The concrete slab, where Cabin 6 once stood. Kneeling, Claire brushed away moss. There, etched shallow into the stone, were letters barely visible. E.C. and D.O. Emily Carter. Danny O'Neill. The children had been here. They had marked it. And then, nothing. That evening, Henry O'Neill knocked on Claire's office door. His hand shook as he held out a shoebox. "Been keeping this 30 years, he said. "Don't know why. Maybe for you inside lay a cassette tape, label faded. June 92, Campfire Songs." Claire borrowed an old deck from the evidence room. The tape whirred, hissed, then filled the office with static and the faint strum of a counselor's guitar. Children's voices sang Kumbaya. Her chest tightened, then the singing faltered. A child's voice whispered near the mic, "Don't go to the red door." "He's waiting." The tape clicked off. Claire sat frozen, pulse racing. Someone else had been at that camp. Someone the records never mentioned. On her investigation board, she rearranged the fragments. Emily's note, Cabin 6, red door. The initials, ECDO. Cassette whisper. Warning of a man waiting. Modern voices. Names carried in fog. Her pen scrawled one question across the board. Who is he? The town gathered at the lakefront for the first time in decades. Parents lit candles. Teenagers filmed on their phones. And when the fog rolled in, heavy and sudden, everyone hushed at once. Claire held her recorder high. Through the mist, a chorus rose. Not one voice, but four. Emily, Tommy, Shannon, Danny. The candles flickered violently. Some went out. Children in the crowd cried. Adults crossed themselves. Claire's recorder spiked. And then, layered faint beneath the names, came something else. A deeper voice. Male. Still waiting. The crowd scattered, panic overtaking reverence. But Claire stood firm, recorder clutched tight. She knew the children were reaching out, but so was someone else. And the lake had never given back what it took. The lake had a way of answering questions with more questions. Detective Claire Harlow spread the case across the motel's tiny table. A cassette with a child's warning, a photocopy of Emily Carter's last notebook page. Cabin 6, red door, don't tell. And a map she'd sketched from memory, the eastern trail bending like a crooked finger toward the old camp foundation. She ran a finger over the words red door until the ink smudged as if the page itself were trying to sink back into water. Outside, fog dragged its belly along the street. Inside, the phone rang. Detective? The voice belonged to Marla Jenkins at the Historical Society. Paper rustled on her end. You asked if we had any original camp blueprints. Most were lost in the flood when the dam overflowed in 1999, but I found a fragment behind an old exhibit panel. Claire stood. What kind of fragment? The utilities overlay, Marla said. Shows where the pump house and storm cellars were. There's a handwritten note in the corner. Cabin 6, O's entry, red. Claire was already grabbing her keys. I'm on my way. The Historical Society smelled like old glue and older memories. Marla laid the curled vellum on a drafting table and pinned the corners with brass weights. It was a partial plan, yellowed, water-warped, but legible. Morning Star Camp, utilities and emergency access. Faded lines marked septic runs, a pump line to the lake, dotted boxes for storm cellars. And there, in pencil darker than the print, someone had scrawled, Cabin 6, Ogg's entry, red, with a tiny arrow pointing to a square that overlapped both the cabin's footprint and a thin service corridor that led toward the pump house. Who wrote that? Claire asked. Marla squinted. Different hand from the architect. Maybe the caretaker added it later. Name? The caretaker in 92 was Garth Sutter, Marla said. Lived in a trailer near the access road. He kept to himself, kinda strict. Claire wrote the name, boxed it twice. Is he still around? Died in 2007, Marla said, but his niece, Trish Sutter, works the diner lunch shift. Then I guess I'm hungry. The diner had a pie case that turned like a memory carousel. Trish Sutter wore her hair in a knot and her father's old denim jacket. When Claire introduced herself and mentioned Garth, Trish exhaled like she'd been bracing for this her whole life. Uncle Garth wasn't warm, Trish said, sliding into the booth across from Claire. He was orderly. Children need rules. Rules keep you safe. That was his song. He liked locks more than people. Did he ever talk about Cabin 6? Claire asked. Trish's eyes flinched. He painted that red door himself. Said red meant emergency. Emergency for what? Trish glanced at the counter, lowered her voice. There was this quiet room talk. Not official, not in brochures. If kids had a panic or disobeyed, counselors would bring them to Garth, and he'd settle them down in the cellar until they were calm. She swallowed. Uncle said it was for their own good. Claire felt heat rise under her collar. How long were kids kept there? An hour, 2. Sometimes longer, Trish said. He didn't like questions. Who else had a key? Trish shook her head. Only him. He called it the auxiliary. Like that made it less wrong. Claire pushed the blueprint fragment across the table, tapping the pencil note. This is his writing then? Trish studied it. Looks like it. He always printed in all caps. Thought cursive was sloppy thinking. Claire marked SUTTERKEYSQUIETROOM on her pad. Did he work alone? Mostly. Sometimes a local boy helped summers, Ricky Dobbins. But Ricky left for the army in 93. Never came back to town. Where's his family? Trailer park off Route 12. His mom's still there. Mrs. Dobbins. Thank you, Claire said, standing. One last thing. If the red door led into a storm cellar under Cabin 6, where did that narrow corridor go? Trish's mouth tightened. Toward the pump house. Uncle said the corridor was for maintenance only. Kids have no business down there. What about adults? Claire asked. Trish looked at the pie carousel instead of answering. The pump house squatted at the edge of the tree line. Concrete, low-roofed, a rusted hatch, on the side half swallowed by vines. The lake sat 20 yards beyond, black as oil, pretending to be a mirror. Claire met Sergeant Drew McKay there, a man who rolled crime scene tape with the practiced elegance of a sailor coiling rope. He'd brought a pry bar and gloves. You get us a warrant? He asked, already smirking. I got us the truth, Claire said. Sometimes she shows up faster than paper. They cleared vines, levered the hatch. The hinges screamed like something alive. A cold breath exhaled from the dark. Inside, the corridor descended 2 shallow steps into a utility passage, just wide enough for 2 people to brush shoulders. The walls were damp concrete, sweating. Red paint flecked the near corner, peeling, arterial, like a warning that had been ignored. Flashlights, Claire said. Their beams crossed, slicing through floating dust. 10 feet in, the passage broadened into a small room with a steel door to the left, its surface painted red once, now flaking to brown, and a second, smaller hatch ahead, blocked by an iron bar. Padlocks hung open, like dead mouths. Someone had been here before them. McKay ran a gloved finger across the bar. No fresh prints, but not ancient Claire pressed her ear to the red door. The metal hummed faintly, as if remembering vibration. She eased the latch. The door stuck, wood swollen behind it, then gave with a shudder. The room beyond was low-ceilinged, 8 by 10, the floor scarred by grooves like the impressions of cots long removed. On the far wall, a pegboard held 2 hooks, empty. A child's paper bracelet, the kind they make for color teams, lay crushed in a corner, its faded marker letters reading S-U-N. Claire crouched, light trembling. Along the baseboard, carved ragged into the wood, were initials. E-C-S-P-T-R-D-O. All 4. McKay's voice was a scrape. They were in here. Or someone put their names here, to keep them in our heads, Claire said, but her throat didn't believe her. On the back of the door, half hidden under coats of paint, a different set of letters had been scratched deep, layer by layer, like a child returning night after night to finish the job. Don't trust him. Claire stared so long, the words blurred. Him who? No one answered. The mother of the helper. The Dobbins trailer sat crooked on its cinder blocks, wind chimes made from spoons and keys jangling on the stoop. Margie Dobbins opened the door with a cigarette and the wariness of a woman who had spent her life choosing what not to say. Ricky ain't here, she announced, defiant. I'm here about 92, Claire said gently. Morning Star Camp. Margie's face softened and hardened at once. She gestured Claire in. The living room was crowded with a couch, a fish tank with no fish, and an Afghan folded with military precision. Photos crowded the wall. A boy in a scout uniform, a young man in fatigues, a folded flag in a shadow box on a shelf. Ricky helped the caretaker sometimes, Margie said. Cash money under the table. He wanted a car. He was 13. Too young, I told him. But Garth said he'd teach him discipline. What did Ricky do? Claire asked. Carried supplies. Fixed leaky faucets. Hauled boxes, Margie said. The cigarette did a little dance in her fingers. One night, he came home white as fish. Told me he wouldn't go back if they asked him to sit in the cellar again. Her voice roughened. Said it was too quiet to breathe. Did he say why he was in the cellar? Garth locked him there, Margie said flatly. Said Ricky backtalked. My boy was no angel, but he wasn't a dog. Did he mention a red door? Margie nodded. He said the door was painted red, so you'd remember it closed. Did he mention any names? Counselors? An adult man besides Garth? Margie's eyes flicked to the flag on the shelf. There was a man, she said after a long moment. Not a counselor. Came in a county truck sometimes. Garth called him Mr. Ames. A-M-E-S. He's from the county. Inspections, Garth said. Ricky thought Mr. Ames wasn't inspecting nothing but us. First name? Claire pressed. Margie shook her head. Ricky never heard nobody call him anything but sir. He was the kind of man who liked that word. The name sat on Claire's tongue like a stone. Ames. Not in any report, not in any file. But children remember the words. Adults choose for themselves. Thank you, Claire said, meaning it. At the door, Margie touched the flag. Ricky died in 11, she said softly. Afghanistan. I used to hate Garth for the cellar. Then I saved some of that for the government. Turns out you can spread hate around like butter and still have some left. Claire didn't try to answer that. She just nodded and left with the wind chimes arguing above her head. County records are where truth goes to take a nap. Claire woke it up. She cross-referenced inspection logs, vehicle assignments, and vendor lists from 1990 to 1993. Most were archived on paper, the rest were digitized badly. Names OCR'd into nonsense. She filtered by Ames and found 3. Ames Construction in a different county. Shirley Ames, a school nurse. And E.L. Ames, temporary contractor. Facilities liaison, 1991 to 1993. No photo, no longer employed. Last listed address, a P.O. box that now belonged to a tanning salon. E.L., Claire said aloud. Initials like a door left cracking open. She phoned Kara Bloom, the modern counterpart in facilities, the one who'd helped her in the Jessica case months back, but caught herself. Wrong story, new town, new ghosts. She called county facilities instead. A tired clerk put her on hold long enough to memorize the ringtone. Finally, we see an Ephraim L. Ames in an old ledger, the clerk said. He was on a seasonal inspector contract at the reservoir and adjacent properties. Adjacent properties like Morning Star Camp, Claire said. I suppose, the clerk said. He wasn't a county employee, just contracted to inspect culverts, pumps, that sort of thing. Where did he go? Contract expired in '93. No forwarding information. Does anyone keep badge numbers from that era? Claire asked. The clerk laughed, not unkindly. Detective, from that era, we barely kept coffee. Claire thanked her anyway, and hung up with the feeling of someone who had found a handprint in dry concrete. Proof someone was there, nothing about where they'd gone. If voices rode the fog, maybe they also rode the water. Claire called the state university 2 counties over and asked a favor from an old friend in acoustics. They set a hydrophone, an underwater microphone, off the end of the old dock at midnight. The air was cold enough to make teeth complain. Fog pawed at their ankles. The lake went from mirror to absence. They recorded for an hour. When they pulled the equipment and downloaded the waveform in the back of Claire's cruiser, the laptop screen glowed like a campfire. At first, the dull hush of water, the small motors of things that live and never sleep. Then, whispers, yes, but not human first. Standing waves from the dam structure, harmonics fluttering like moths. The tech Noah, isolated bands, filtered noise, frowned. Here, he said, and the car turned into a chapel. A faint child's voice threaded through the lower frequencies. Tommy. Then another higher. Shannon. It wasn't language as much as names caught by a net of water and time. Claire's throat tightened. They always say names. It's the most durable thing to carry, Noah murmured. He rewound, slowed, filtered again. Beneath the names, faint, like a cellar under a cellar, a man's voice strobed. Still waiting. Noah lifted his hands from the keyboard like he'd touched a burner. That is human. It lives in the same formant range as adult male speech. It's not an artifact. Claire closed her eyes, saw a red door. Can we triangulate? She asked. Roughly, Noah said. The amplitude peaks here, east by northeast of the dock. Cabin 6, Claire said. Or below it, Noah said. They couldn't bring in state search and rescue without headlines, but they could call Tom Harker, a local diver who pulled wedding rings from the shallows and lost anchors from the ski cove. Harker had the look of a man who had shed most of his words underwater. Visibility's garbage, he told Claire, zipping his dry suit. Silt's like talc. If there's structure down there, it'll be half swallowed. That's okay, Claire said. I just need to know if the pump corridor goes anywhere. Harker dropped into the water like a coin into a well. The lake sealed over him without a ripple. Claire watched the tether line quiver and disappear, felt the patience of old water gnaw at her knuckles. The fog held its breath. 15 minutes later, Harker surfaced, ripped his mask up, and spat lake. There's a grate down there, he panted. Heavy. East of the old cabin slab. feeds a culvert that runs under the shore. Locked. Bolted, he said, but one bolt's missing. Not rusted off. Removed. Freshish, considering Claire felt her scalp crawl. Can you mark it? Harker clipped a fluorescent float to the grate's lip. It bobbed in the fog like an eye. What's on the other side? McKay asked. Harker shook his head. A drop. Can't see. Still eat you. Like a throat. Claire looked from the float to the pump house, to the red door, to the blueprint. A path formed. A kid's maze traced with a crayon. Cabin 6, cellar, service corridor, pump house, culvert, grate, lake. If someone wanted to move children where no one would look, they could do it without ever stepping outside. Who would build that for a camp? McKay said, angry in the way men get when they don't know who to punch. People who like pipes and control, Claire said, and a man who says, still waiting in the lake. One name had surfaced in Claire's notes again and again at the edges. Molly Kincaid, a counselor in '92 who left town after the disappearance and never granted an interview. She worked now at a recovery center stateside, helping people get clean from pills that promised better mornings and only delivered fade. Claire drove 3 hours and showed her the cassette. Molly watched the tape spools turn the way some people watch weather, like it will either ruin you or let you grow. When the child's whisper came, "Don't go to the red door. He's waiting." Molly closed her eyes. Her hands went still on the paper cup. "Who was he?" Claire asked. Molly swallowed. "We called him the inspector. Garth said he was county, there to sign off on safety. He wore a jacket with a patch he never let us read up close. He didn't supervise anything. He supervised us." Her voice thinned. "He made us feel small." "Name?" "I never heard anyone say it where we could hear," Molly said. "But the office had a sign-in sheet." Garth kept it in a drawer. "One afternoon I caught a glimpse of E. Ames and a time. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I didn't see. I told myself presumed drowned meant I could go on living." Tears stood in her eyes, angry at themselves. "I was 20. I thought being sorry would be a receipt." "Did you ever see him near cabin 6? Claire asked. Molly's face went slack with memory. "He stood by the red door during storms, like a picture in a frame. He liked to be the last thing you saw when you were sent down." Claire felt the air leave the room. Did the children ever come back different? Molly stared past Claire at a window that reflected only the room. "Quieter," she whispered, like someone rearranged their furniture. Back in Willow Creek, Claire returned to the pump house with a locksmith and a bolt cutter, and a polite disregard for jurisdiction. McKay posted a deputy at the tree line, because sometimes the right thing needs a witness. They unseated the bolts on the interior hatch that aligned with the culvert's path. The bar fought them, and then surrendered. The hatch opened to a narrow shaft with iron rungs slick with age. A smell rose that wasn't just water. Old air, dead leaves, time. At the bottom, the passage sloped toward the lake like a tongue. On the right, a niche was cut into the wall. A shelf. On it sat a key on a rusted ring. Not modern, not new. A brass tag dangled from it, stamped with letters. Claire held it in her palm like a fossil pulled from an animal that shouldn't have existed here. Someone had kept a spare where only they knew to reach. She bagged it, labeled it, and hated how her hands shook. "Who would leave a key here?" McKay asked above her. "Someone who knew he could come back," Claire said, not recognizing her own voice. Sheriff Leland found her in the corridor before she could climb out, his bulk filling the door like a plug. His voice bounced off the concrete. You're done, Harlow. Am I? Claire said, holding the bagged key up to the light. Because the lake's just getting started. You think you found your ghost, he snapped. You found a storm cellar and a pipe. We don't need panic. We need business. We needed children, Claire said, the words sharp enough to cut rope. You signed off on presumed drowned and went fishing for 30 years. There was a system here. She pointed past him toward the red door. A door. A corridor. A grate. Names carved into wood like breath marks. And a man who called himself Inspector, so no one would ask his name. Leland's face did something ugly and brief. You want a villain, he said finally. Pick the dead caretaker. He's convenient. Don't build a monster you can't catch. Claire stepped up into the light, eye to eye. I don't need to build him. He built himself. I just need to follow the hallway he left behind. For a second, she thought he might actually try to block her. Then something in his shoulders softened. The part of a man that remembers his own child's first word. Careful, he muttered, stepping aside. Monsters don't like being found. Back at the motel, a padded envelope waited on her pillow like a patient. No return address. The clerk said, a gray-haired woman, glasses, left it for the detective. Inside, a micro-cassette and a sticky note. I kept this. I shouldn't have. M. Molly Claire borrowed a tiny recorder from Evidence Again and clicked play. Noise, then a room. Air moving the way it does when a person tries not to breathe. Then a voice. Adult, male, too close to the mic. Common the way wicked things are when they're sure. Still waiting, he whispered. Names. One by one. Nice and slow. Silence, then a child's voice, barely above her breath. Emily by the sound of the lilt. Do we get to go home now? The man exhaled. It sounded like a smile put on like a coat. After we finish the list. The tape clicked, rewound itself a fraction, and stopped. Claire sat very still. The room felt 2 sizes too small for breathing. If Molly had recorded that in 92, she had handed Claire a time machine with no controls. She looked at the blueprint, at the key, at the float bobbing on a lake she could see from the window when the fog led her. She knew now where the corridor began and where it wanted to end. She also knew that the lake had not been whispering about ghosts. It had been repeating the litany it was forced to memorize. At dawn, Claire returned to the pump house with Harker, McKay, and a borrowed portable winch. They rigged the interior hatch, secured lines, and set a second hydrophone to monitor what the dark might say, if asked nicely. The red door inside the cellar groaned when Claire closed it behind them. The corridor hummed, not like machines, but like memory. Somewhere, water shifted. Somewhere old air met new and negotiated. Harker slid down the rungs into the shaft, clipped into the line, and eased toward the submerged grate. On my mark, he called up. Winch ready. Ready, McKay said, knuckles white. Harker wedged a pry bar between the grate and the concrete lip, and nodded. McKay engaged the winch. The grate screamed, then shuddered upward half an inch. An inch. Enough. Cold water surged, not angry. Immediate. Claire felt it in her ankles, then her calves. The corridor drank lake and spat it back. The hydrophone chirped and then sang. On the laptop screen, waveforms bloomed. Names rose in the dark. Emily. Tommy. Shannon. Danny. Then, layered beneath, the other voice, older, patient as stone. Still waiting. Hold, Claire said, and everything did. The grate lifted another inch. Silt exploded in black clouds. Something small and pale tumbled through the water into Claire's light. A bead bracelet, yellow and blue, the elastic frayed. The letters on the beads spelled D-A-N-N-Y. Claire caught it in her gloved hand the way you catch a moth. To observe, not to own. She held it up. In the tight beam of the flashlight, the little letters gleamed like teeth. "We close it," McKay said through clenched jaw. "We close it now." "Not yet," Claire said, hatred and hope fighting in her throat. "One more minute." The hydrophone squealed, then steadied. The children's names braided into a single chord, like the sound breath makes when it learns itself again. The older voice tried to wedge between them and failed once, twice. Then something else moved in the waveform. A new frequency, higher, wild like wind through glass. A child's voice. Not a name, a sentence. "Open the other door." Harker heard it through his bone conduction headset and flinched. "Detective, did you—" "I heard it," Claire said. "Where's the other door?" Harker panned his light deeper into the culvert. "There's a side gate, small. Maybe a maintenance bypass. Half buried." "Can you reach it?" "A beat." "I can try." He disappeared under the black again. Claire stared at the blueprint fragment in her head and saw what she'd missed. The thin secondary line branching from the culvert. A thread leading not back to the pump house, not to the lake, but under the eastern bank, toward what on paper was just blank soil. "Come on," she whispered. Not to Harker, not to McKay, but to the lake itself. The hydrophone popped, then filled the corridor with a sound that wasn't quite a cheer and wasn't quite a sob. Harker's voice burst over the line, breathless. "Found a latch. It's painted red on the inside." Of course it was. He pulled. Something gave in the dark. Water shifted direction, like a room inhaling for the first time in years. The float outside bobbed twice and then steadied. On the laptop, the children's names stretched into a long exhale that made Claire's knees weak. Then silence. Not empty, peaceful. The kind of silence that follows a prayer finished properly. Claire looked at McKay. His eyes were wet and unapologetic. "Close the grate," she said quietly. "We're done here." By noon, Sheriff Leland issued a terse statement about maintenance anomalies and dangerous culvert conditions. The mayor called it a public safety triumph. The resort posted a photo of the sunrise over the lake with an inspirational quote about renewal. Claire didn't go to the press conference. She drove to the county archive with a photocopy of a name, Ephraim L. Ames. A clerk old enough to remember when files had spines let her dig through a box labeled facilities, expired vendors, 90 to 95. Receipts paperclipped to carbon copies told a story of men who billed by the hour and watched time like a pet. At the bottom, Claire found a W-9 with a signature that tried too hard. The L in the middle like a knife. Ephraim L. Ames. Address, CO Green Hollow Storage. Unit number smudged. Phone, dead. Green Hollow Storage sat behind a shuttered garden center on the edge of the next county. The attendant shrugged when Claire flashed her badge. "Units that old are auctioned or trashed," he said. "We keep paperwork 5 years, then feed it to the shredder." "Any records at all?" He scratched his chin. "We do keep locks we cut," he offered, gesturing to a bin in the corner filled with padlocks like a pirate's small fortune. Each had a masking tape tag with a unit number and date. Claire sifted, hands blackening with old metal, until she held one stamped GH112/1996. On the tag, in faded pen, Ames. The key was long gone. The owner was a ghost who preferred storage. But ghosts leave shadows. Outside, Claire sat in her car and stared at the padlock in her palm. Her phone buzzed, a text from Molly Kincaid. "Sometimes it's enough to open the right door," the message read. "Sometimes it's not." Claire looked toward Willow Creek, even though she couldn't see it. The lake had given her back a bracelet and a sentence. The rest, bodies, bones, a ledger of wrongs, might stay below. But the names were louder now, not just to the fog, to the town. She thought of Henry O'Neill, of an empty bedroom with a baseball cap on a hook. She thought of Trish Sutter, of Margie Dobbins, of all the people who had learned to carry absence like a wallet. Sometimes justice is a door that opens. Sometimes it's the hand that keeps it open. Claire put the lock on the passenger seat and drove back into the fog. The lake was quieter after the grate moved and the other door gave. Not silent. Quiet. Like a room where someone finally stopped whispering a list and let the air be air. Detective Claire Harlow drove the access road at dawn, headlights combing the gray. The fluorescent float Harker had clipped over the culvert bobbed once, twice, then settled into a steady heartbeat. The fog lay low, like it had been told to sit. On the passenger seat, the old padlock from Green Hollow storage knocked gently against the console whenever the road turned. It felt like a relic dug from somebody else's past. Cold, heavy, stamped with a name that hid inside its own initial, E.L. Ames. Claire parked by the pump house and listened. No voices, no names surfacing in the air, only the soft lick of water against the shore and the distant clatter of a gull annoyed at something ordinary. For the first time since she'd stepped into Willow Creek, the lake didn't feel like a throat. It felt like water. They went back one last time, Claire, Sergeant McKay, and Tom Harker, to follow what lay past the other door. Not to conquer it, to understand it. Harker took the shaft again, slow and deliberate, anchored by a fresh line. He found the bypass gate he'd pulled the night before. Its inner face painted red, the color dark underwater, like dried brick. Beyond it, the culvert split and rose into a low utility corridor that had once bled toward drainage. Now, silt had settled into a sort of floor. Someone had laid boards there long ago. Half-rotted planks, just enough for small feet to keep dry. Maintenance passage. Harker's voice crackled through the bone conduction mic. It runs parallel to the bank. After 20 yards, there's a niche. Shelf with old candle stubs. Then a hatch up top. Sealed from above, a beat. Was sealed. He pressed. It gave. Earth sifted down like flour through a sieve. Claire and McKay scrambled up the bank to where his light dappled the underbrush. They pulled vines and leaf litter until their gloves found planks gone soft with years. Underneath, a square service door painted once. Red, now masked by a whole forest's worth of forgetting. They pried it open. The hinges didn't scream. They sighed. Inside, the passage breathed shallowly, like an animal deciding whether to trust. Someone used this, McKay said, staring at the candle stubs when they climbed down to meet Harker. Soot had kissed the rock above the shelf. Wax had pooled into long-ago drips. Someone needed to see, Claire said, and the words felt heavier than they should. The corridor didn't lead to a room with answers. It led to a junction. Another run of pipe and stone and choices. Whoever had built it never trusted a single path. Back outside, Claire traced where the passage would skim beneath the eastern bank and re-emerge. Her finger landed on a stand of pines that had grown up since the dam. Beyond them, the old utility road curved behind what used to be Morning Star Camp's maintenance yard. In 1992, a man who called himself Inspector could have walked from truck to red door without being seen. He could have stood by the cellar, listened to children's breath become names, and when the fog came down like a curtain, he could have moved them along the corridor toward the lake and the gate and the grate, keeping them on dry planks with soft instructions and a voice measured to sound like safety. He could have done all of it without leaving footprints where anyone bothered to look. Paper doesn't forget. It crinkles, it stains, it hides, but it doesn't forget. At the county's pension archive, Claire found what the storage yard hadn't kept. A rolled microfilm from a box labeled Vendor Closeouts 93 to 96 coughed up a canceled check. County to Ephraim L. Ames, endorsed at a bank that had since changed names twice. The back carried a signature full of loops that wanted to be seen. In the same roll, a site audit with a line nobody read because it was dull. Final seasonal inspection. Morningstar Dam and Aux Facilities. Liaison, E.L. Ames. Someone had stamped it. Received with a date 2 weeks after the kids vanished. The audit's checklist was all boxes, all neat ink. Safety cages, present. Pump house, locked. Emergency egress, operational. Cellar access, secured. Claire circled emergency egress and felt her stomach drop. To whom had it been emergency? She took the microfilm printouts to Marla Jenkins at the Historical Society. Marla didn't speak for a while. She tapped the word operational with a knuckle. We thought auxiliary meant shelter, she said, not route. Claire nodded. Auxiliary is just a word. It serves whatever it's attached to. They never found Ephraim L. Ames living under that name. Maybe he died with it. Maybe he shed it like a skin and stepped into one with new initials. Maybe he went where men go when the world stops asking for their signatures. But the town learned the sound of his absence. Sheriff Leland stood on the gym stage with the mayor and read a statement that sweat had smudged along the edges. He said words like new evidence, improper facilities, and failures we can't take back. He did not say Ames. He did not say Red Door. He did not say children's names until he had to, and then he said them with the careful reverence of a man afraid of breaking china. Emily Carter, Tommy Ruiz, Shannon Porter, Danny O'Neill. When he finished, the room did not clap. It breathed. Henry O'Neill stepped forward, cane knocking the varnish with each careful stride. He took the microphone even though no one offered it. My boy liked to tie his shoes twice, he said. Said once was for going, and twice was for staying. He looked at Claire. You opened a door that should have never been there. If he couldn't come back through it, maybe somebody else won't go in. He turned toward the lake, even though a wall stood between them. Danny, he said, voice fraying but clear. I hear you. They set a memorial on the dock at dusk, 4 small lanterns and a marker carved from river slate. For the 4 who walked into fog, and the many who kept saying their names. When the first lantern lit, the fog did come, because fog is weather and not a curse. Phones rose in the crowd out of habit, and hands lowered them again out of respect. Claire stood with her recorder in her pocket, but not on. It didn't feel right to ask the lake for proof when the town was finally offering belief. The wind slid its palm over the water. The lantern steadied. Somewhere a motor hummed and faded. No voices came. Beside her, Molly Kincaid, who had driven in for this and would leave before anyone could thank her, exhaled a tremor and smiled in a way only she would notice. Sometimes, she whispered, silence is the miracle. Claire nodded. Sometimes it's the answer. Henry O'Neill touched the slate and left the smallest, most stubborn bouquet, a cluster of wild asters he'd cut from the ditch because he refused to buy what the world already made with enough effort. Happy birthday, kid, he said to the water, not checking the calendar. Then he laughed at himself, like fathers do when they talk to the air and don't care who sees. A breeze came off the dam, gentle as a sleeve, and the lantern flames leaned, flickered, didn't go out. Weeks later, construction resumed under a different plan. The resort redrew its shoreline to leave the eastern bank alone. A green cutout on the map labeled Protected Area, in memory. No bulldozers, no villas, a place for benches and names. Marla curated a small exhibit in the Historical Society. The blueprint fragment, a copy of Emily's notebook page, a photo of Tommy's crooked cap, Shannon's ribbon pressed into glass, Danny's bead bracelet gently cradled in a bay of light that never heeded the case. On the wall, 4 dates and a sentence. When the fog comes, say them louder. Trish Sutter quit the diner and took a job with Parks, painting new doors at trailheads with colors that meant things like welcome and caution and never again. Margie Dobbins started parking by the memorial to drink her coffee and read the paper. Sometimes she spoke to the water. Sometimes she just listened to the quiet and counted that as a win. Claire sent the padlock to a lab 2 counties over, not because she thought it would sing, but because some artifacts deserved to be asked nicely one last time. The tech called a month later to say the tag's pen chemistry matched early 90s county stock, that the lock model matched Green Hollow's catalog, that nothing had been wiped. There were no prints left to take. Sometimes that's all you get, the text said. A line that lines up. Thank you, Claire said, meaning it. On her last morning in Willow Creek, she went to the dock alone before the town woke. A thin mist clung to the far bank, more memory than fog. She watched the water for a while, not waiting for it to speak. When she left, she paused by the marker and, without recording, said the names once. Quiet, the way a person introduces friends to a room they love. Emily, Tommy, Shannon, Danny. The lake did not answer. It didn't need to. She turned toward the road. Behind her, the lanterns, not lit, caught the first spill of sunlight and shone anyway, as if remembering what they were for. And Willow Creek, for the first time in a long time, let the morning in.